Welcome back to the ACRP 2021 virtual conference. This is our second track. Today we're talking about operational efficiencies. We had two really good sessions already this morning, and I know our next one will be no exception. Wendy Tate, who's the Director of Research Operations with Advarra, is going to be talking to us about protocol feasibility to improve site operations and achieve study goals. Wendy's presentation is going to be 30-40 minutes, give or take. Would encourage you to ask questions. We'll try to save them probably for the end and do a Q&A. I'll come back on and help moderate that with Wendy, where I will do the Q's and she will do the A's because I couldn't handle the A's. But we're looking forward to this. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us, and let me turn things over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm very excited to be talking to you today about protocol feasibility and how you can improve your site utilizing protocol feasibility operations within your study activation process. Just some quick disclosures. As this educational session, I have nothing to disclose. And what I'm hoping we can achieve in the short time we have together today is to really discuss how the importance of having an organizational approach to feasibility analysis can help your study activation processes. I do want to say up front that while we're going to talk about this from a holistic organization approach, I understand that not everybody that's listening in may have control over their organization. You may be overseeing a specific department or research team, or even just your own portfolio of studies you're working on. And I'm hoping that these hints and tips and processes can help you regardless of the size and the breadth of the studies that you're working with. These are all applicable from a single study all the way up to entire organization portfolio. We'll talk about different components of a feasibility analysis, and we'll talk about how they can complement your study activation activities, and how, as this thinking about this together, can really help you have a very successful study activation process and loosen up gaps and bottlenecks and make things a little bit easier. And then also discussing inputs and metrics, because you can't improve if you don't understand where you're coming from. And so really talking about how those metrics can help facilitate and also give you some insight into what your peers in the site world have said about different aspects of study activation and protocol feasibility. So first of all, I want to make sure that we level set. Let's make sure all of us are on the same stage on what protocol feasibility is. There are multiple definitions depending on what type of perspective you're taking. And so for today's talk, a protocol feasibility and analysis is going to really talk about the logistical aspects of a research study. And we're really talking about it prior to starting the activation process. It is, in my opinion, and a lot of my peers, that protocol feasibility should be one of the earliest things you do in the study activation process. And we're going to be approaching it from that extent, because what we want to make sure is that before you start dedicating efforts to protocol feasibility, or sorry, to the study activation process, it's actually feasible to conduct the study as a whole. And so really what you need to do is determine if you have the resources to be able to fulfill all the commitments to your sponsor, to your organization, to your investigators, to your participants, making sure that you have staff resources, that you have the financial resources, you have the logistical resources, and bringing that all together as an analysis to help make sure that you can successfully execute the study from start to finish. Now, I want to be very clear that this is not intended to duplicate other processes. There are many organizations that have scientific review processes that are very formal. If you are in the NCI designated cancer world, you will have a protocol review and monitoring committee, a PRMC. Many organizations already have a research team and departmental setups to ensure that the scientific validity of a study is there. That is not what we're talking about today as part of protocol feasibility. We're going to leave that aspect to a different conversation. And this also isn't supposed to replace IRB or ethical review. That's another process that's very important to keep separate from logistics, because that's really dealing with the right safety welfare of the participants. And we don't want to muddle up those conversations of can we logistically do the protocol with that ethical review. They are highly related, and a lot of that information from a feasibility analysis can help inform the scientific review. It can help inform the ethical review, but really we're going to talk about how it stands on its own and really talk about the administrative aspects to make sure a study can be successful. So why protocol feasibility? Why really include this as another step? Because we already know that the study activation process can be very long. It involves a lot of different steps, a lot of different players, a lot of different processes. So why do we talk about having basically one more thing. Well, really what it does is it's really going to help us ensure that the clinical trials that we bring on board are things that we can finish, that we can conduct effectively. And I've already mentioned that a couple of times in the first couple slides. But really, we already know engaging in clinical research takes a lot of resources and a lot of time. And these are not small resources. These are very expensive and important resources. We're talking about staff time. We're talking about investigator effort. We're talking about complex things like potentially infusion clinics, ORs, inpatient stays, clinical work that needs to be done, drugs, devices, other things that cost a lot of money that need to be shipped and handled and accounted for. So all of these efforts, if we're putting them in without being able to achieve the aims of the study, really is a waste of time and effort, and ultimately an unethical thing to conduct, because if you can't complete the scientific aims of a protocol, then any risk you put subjects at is too much risk. And so really, we're going to take a look at this as a business decision. Can we, given the parameters of this protocol, actually invest the resources and the time from a staff perspective, from a financial perspective, from our facilities perspective, from our participant pools? Can we dedicate all the things needed in order to make sure that we can have this study be successful? Or do we take this and these resources and choose a different study to make sure that that study is successful? It's a business decision. These are all projects that we can make sure can be executed as intended. So what are the logistic components of a protocol feasibility analysis? And I just went over a lot of them. We are talking about staff and resources and facilities. And today we're really going to focus on 4 specific elements that fall into these broader categories. We're going to talk about financial viability. We're going to talk a bit about operational ability of your organization or your research program. We're going to talk about accrual estimations, and then assessing past performance, and how all of these can come together and really discuss a really well-rounded approach to ensuring study viability. So let's dig right into financial viability. Why do you want to consider financial viability upfront? Well, we already know that it's very expensive to conduct trials. Tufts has reported over the last several years that it takes a lot of money. 2.5 billion was the 2011 number to get a drug all the way through development. And with the clinical phases costing so much of that money, and when you take a look at it per site, the sites obviously are absorbing a lot of that cost because they are the boots on the ground conducting the research. And so while a lot of these studies are sponsored, it's really important to know for sites to know how much it costs them to conduct research. Why? So that they can ask for the proper funds from their funding agencies, from their sponsors. They know where they're going to be taking funds from internally if they need to supplement with internal funds, and they can make sure that they're breaking even. You may say, hey, you know what, if we lose money on one study, that's not a big deal. However, if you're looking at an entire research portfolio, losing money on a single study might be okay. But what happens when that happens over and over and over? If you're not accounting for all of the different aspects that it costs you to conduct research, you may say, yep, we are accounting for those MRIs, we're accounting for those blood tests, we're accounting for all those things. But are you properly accounting for things like staff time? All the staff time, not just the coordinator or the investigator, but what about your budget analysts? What about your regulatory coordinators? What about all of the different pharmacy technicians and pharmacists that are putting the drugs together? Making sure that all those costs are covered will help you keep those financial losses at bay. And it's important for all types of studies. You have sponsor reimbursement. Obviously, as I've mentioned, a lot of industry studies, people are very aware from the site level that we need to budget for our industry sponsored studies. We do a budget negotiation and all of that. But how many of you actually do it for things that are institutionally funded, for other types of studies, federally funded studies, making sure that you know where that money is coming from? And while you may not recoup it completely from the funder, if it's a federally funded study, for example, you may not get all of that back in a grant. Where is the rest of that money coming from? What type of institutional commitment are you putting to it? Do you have the funds in the bank in order to do that commitment? Knowing what your big ticket items are. What are the biggest things that are going to be charged on this study? Knowing that that's a gap that can really be potentially dangerous if you don't account for it. What are the must-have costs that you need to recover? What are the deal breakers? Now, I've already mentioned that protocol feasibility should be done really early on to be most effective. It's not really feasible to do an entire budget draft and make sure you have every cost accounted for before protocol feasibility. Otherwise, again, you're moving it down the line. But knowing what some of these big ticket items are, these must-haves, these deal breakers, that if you already have a draft budget from someone, whoever that funder is, you know what your institutional bucket of being able to support trials are, knowing what your must-haves and your deal breakers are, you can get a pretty good idea of what kind of gap you're trying to traverse to make sure that your study is going to achieve a financial solvency that's going to be successful for your organization. So we at Advarra conducted a survey, I should say. We did a survey last fall, late last year, to really ask sites, why don't you tell us about the study activation and your pain points? And what are you doing as far as protocol feasibility? What are different aspects that you're considering during the different times and processes that you are activating a study? And when we talked about financial viability, what we found is that over 1 in 10, 11% of sites didn't consider financial feasibility during the study activation process. That's 1 in 10 sites that aren't knowledgeable about whether or not they're going to break even on a study and they're going to be financially solvent in the long run. If you don't do financial feasibility during the study activation process, it is near impossible to recover your costs. You don't know how much it's costing up front to do the research. You need to make sure that you know this, because otherwise you're leaving a gap that the institution is going to have to fill, the research program is going to have to fill, or the PI is going to have to fill. And those funds can take away from other studies, particularly things like investigator-initiated studies or organizationally designed science that can really promote novel ideas coming from your organization in order to fill the gap that this other study has inadvertently left you. So what we can do with that is by putting financial feasibility into a protocol feasibility process as part of this analysis, is that we can make sure that we know what that gap is going to be. And can we really take on that? Can we take this study? Do we need to find additional funding? It doesn't mean that you have to fill it with institutional funds, but perhaps there's another route. Do you go back to the sponsor and say, you know what, these are things that are just have to be covered. They need to be dealt with. Do you go and find additional funding? Do you go back and do you find additional ways to be able to meet those costs, or maybe lower your costs? Maybe you need to find a new vendor that can do your laboratory or your imaging or something. But basically, it opens a conversation for ensuring that financial viability. Again, I've mentioned financial feasibility shouldn't just include the actual procedures. We really need to take a look at staff time. How much does it cost to actually activate the study? So many budgets are just really looking at study conduct. How much does it take? How much are we going to reimburse you, or we're going to fund you to be able to run each participant through each study visit with these specific procedures and compensate the investigator for their time? But what about all the time to activate a study, to go through things like putting all the regulatory paperwork together, ensuring that your recruitment materials are there and you're ready to actually recruit on day one when that study opens, going through and making sure that the budget negotiation and contract execution processes are covered. So making sure that your technologies are covered. So many sites have technologies that they themselves are housing for the success of research, in-house CTMSs, in-house e-regulatory systems. Are you compensating for those? Are you making sure that those costs are there? Because those go to support those trials and the trial success. And so making sure that you have this financial viability assessed is going to make sure that you know where those funds are coming from and what needs to happen. And as you can see, our report on the findings on the right can tell us that there are a lot of organizations out there that really have some way to go to be financially successful. 40% of our respondents didn't have a master price schedule in place. A research fee schedule is another way to phrase that. How do they know what research is actually costing them? If a funder is coming to you and saying, we'll pay you X number of dollars for this procedure, that may sound like a lot of money until you get the bill from the provider that's giving you that service. And you go, oh my goodness, how am I going to traverse this gap? Knowing what all of those are up front, having a master price schedule, knowing what it's going to cost you to get an image from a laboratory test done, from a specific vendor, making sure that that's contracted up front is going to be critical for ensuring that you can go to the sponsor then and say, you know what, it's going to cost us this in order to get this taken care of, and we need to have that into our budget to compensate. And then again, 75% of our respondents, when they actually did ask for costs to be reimbursed or to be covered or provided for their in-house technologies, sponsors responded and said, great. So the 75% was able to recover that from the sponsor. And that was for CTMS costs specifically. That rate went up to about 97% with e-regulatory. The thing we found with this metric, though, is not everybody asks for those costs to be reimbursed. And that's something that needs to be done, is you need to actually go to your sponsor and say, this is the cost of running research at our organization. We want to be on board with you. We're excited about this study. We want to offer this to our participants, but this is the cost of doing business. And we want to make sure that we're successful for you. And one way that we can be successful for you is to make sure that we can pay all of our bills. So moving on into operational ability, why should we consider operational ability? And this one seems a little bit cut and dry. If you can't actually do the procedures in the study, then you shouldn't do the study. But really, we want to make sure it's more than that. A lot of people can say, yep, we can do this. That sounds good. But do you actually have the ability to do it now? Do you have the ability to do it in the time frame they're asking? PK draws. It's a blood draw. A lot of people can draw blood. It's phlebotomy. Very, very common skill in research teams, in nursing skills, in pharmacy. A lot of different people can draw blood, but can you draw blood every 30 minutes for the next 48 hours? How do you do that in the middle of the night? What setting do you do that in? Do people have to be inpatient in the clinic? There are a lot of logistical and operational aspects to considering how things actually get done in a research protocol. And most of you on this call are going, yep, I get that. That makes sense. That's why it's important to consider this up front. Taking a look at those procedures, at the schedule of events, at the timing, and being able to say, can we actually do this now? Do we have coordinators that are available to complete these study procedures when we need to be doing this study? Are they already committed to other studies? Do they have the training, the certification, the licensure to actually do these things? Do we have the facilities to do this? Do we have the right imaging equipment? Do we have access to the right laboratories? Do we have the pharmacy? Do we have the pathology department? Do we have all of these other groups saying, yes, we can actually provide these services for you? It's not just enough to say, hey, our hospital has these services. Have you talked to them about this study to say, hey, this is what we're going to need from you. Can we contract you? Are you available to do this? Is this time that you can set aside so that these things can be met in this way? Can they actually stain the tissues with the right dyes and preserve them the way that you need them? Can you ship things to the central lab? Making sure that all those operational things are taken care of will, again, ensure that the data is being collected in the best manner possible so that you can answer the scientific question at hand, and making sure that you have all of those services ready and willing to start on day one. And then making sure that there's training. It's really imperative that staff are trained properly in research as a whole and specific regulations and guidelines associated with it, but really on the protocol, making sure that they know that protocol, making sure that they know what's coming up, making sure that there's backup available in case they need that. So why do you need operational ability? Because this is really going to speak to your strength at being a solid research center. If you can't perform on this study, it's going to be unlikely that a sponsor wants to come back and say, yeah, we're going to bank on you again. We want you to do another study for us. We want to set you up as an organization that can actually accrue the number of people and get them through the study the best possible so that you can get contract after contract and just grow your research program, help the people out there that are looking for new and innovative treatments, and really put yourself aside as a top-notch research center. And measuring operational ability early on to say, yes, we have these resources, those resources are available, and we're going to dedicate them to the study is really important. So when we talk to sites, what did they tell us about the operational ability to run research? Well, really about when you talk about staff pain points, there's a lot out there with with clinical research sites. Taking a look at the workforce, knowledge is critical. There's several publications, but I did reference this recent one that came earlier this year from ACRP. The link's at the bottom of the slide, which you can get in the downloads. But really, one of the things that this article highlighted was knowledge is critical if you want to retain research staff. Turnover is so high in the clinical research realm. And the second article from Cambridge.org underneath reports 20 to 37% of clinical research coordinator turnover rates. I've seen other studies that say up to 33% of CRCs are going to be looking for a new job within 6 months. And this was pre-pandemic. So it's not necessarily just the strain of living in the world of COVID-19. This has been a long-standing issue where clinical research coordinators really are strained to do their jobs properly. They're being asked to do more and more research. The federal government has been giving less and less support in infrastructure grants and in general research grants. Industry is strapped, trying to make sure that they're getting through these approval processes quickly. Institutions are taking a lot of burden on to actually conduct research. So retaining that workforce is critical. Making sure that those CRCs are trained properly, that you're retaining them is really important so that you're not spending time trying to hire and train new people, that you have people that can just study, and they can actually be proud of the work that they're doing. They can be engaged in the research that they're doing, making sure that they're doing the tasks that they really want to be doing. Which is why they got in the field. They want to be working with participants. They want to be progressing, good, solid, regulatorily sound research. They really want to be part of the progression of science and medicine and ethical work. So really retaining that workforce is critical. And one thing that we found when we asked about two specific study activation areas, budget negotiations and regulatory, is that we found that knowledge translates into having issues in those areas. People who reported spending less than half of their effort on study activation processes with the budget negotiation area really felt that staff expertise was a pain point. Budget negotiation, financial work in the clinical research realm is complex, and it's different than financial work in other areas. Pre-award versus post-award, and most organizations are separate units because they do have very specific identities. And so when people are spending not a lot of time on that effort, it gets hard to really be expert in that area. So when we're talking about study activation, what are we talking about? Drafting up budgets that are complete, performing Medicare coverage analyses to ensure that you know what can be billable to Medicare and insurance versus what should be billed to the sponsor, making sure that those budget negotiations are efficient and effective with your sponsors. You need to have staff that can be dedicated to that effort. And those that said, you know what, we spend less than half of our effort on this, acknowledge that expertise is their largest pain point. And really, number of staff is important too. When we talk to universities and academic medical centers, almost half of them stated that the number of staff were a pain point. They didn't have enough staff to really be able to work on budget negotiations properly. So what happens? It drags out the budget negotiation process. It drags out the ability for them to really thoroughly get into the budget and make sure it's what it is. They may rush through a budget draft because they have many other projects on their plate. And so making sure that you have staff that are dedicated to the effort, as well as the number of staff to cover it, is really important. And going over into the regulatory realm, it's not that much different. Staff turnover was the largest pain point in AMCs and then health-based systems as well. So a fifth to a quarter of them were saying that, you know what, we have a problem with staff turning over. What does that mean then? Well, you're constantly hiring, you're constantly training. That's time that's taken away from actually getting study work done. And that's a pain point because then it's frustration and it's exhausting. And a lot of times managers and staff who are staying just feel like they're spinning their wheels because it's just a revolving door and they're constantly trying to just get people to work on it, work in the realm and get the work done. And a lot of times they're taking on extra projects because if someone leaves, someone has to pick up that work. It doesn't just sit there until the next person comes in and is fully trained. There's still amendments to process. There's still adverse events to get in front of investigators. There's still continuing review to be done. There's still FDA paperwork to file. And so that's really important to make sure that you can retain that staff and making sure that they're there to be able to manage those studies in a compliant manner. When you have gaps in staffing, when you have staff switchover, you have a more likely chance of having deviations on those studies. Let's lower the deviations. Let's make sure your site is sound by trying to really help that staff turnover. And then in regulatory realm, we asked about other pain points, and 41% of them mentioned that consent form writing was a pain point. It's really interesting when you talk to coordinators. I happen to have a history on both sides of the house, so to say. I worked at IRB for several years in the IRB office. I've also worked on research teams and leading research teams. And really, when it comes down to it, there's a very different process of writing a consent form and presenting a consent. And one thing that when we constantly talk to coordinators, they say, I know how to talk to a person about the study. I can consent. We can have a conversation. But when it comes to actually writing that in an ethical and compliant way, those same coordinators that are excellent at consenting participants really struggle with making sure that they have an ethically, regulatorily sound document that's understandable to a participant. It's two different skill sets. And so when you talk about regulatory as a whole, really, regulatory is a part of everybody's job in the clinical research realm. And so being able to make sure that you can hone skills to people who are really talented and have the knowledge base to do those items is important. Because if you tell a regulatory person, you do all regulatory, and it encompasses just a massive amount of information, you're going to have gaps and you're going to have errors. And so understanding where those pain points are and being able to isolate them and either train to solve or identify another person to be able to manage or another process that can cover it, that's really important to making sure that your staff are going to be able to execute the study. So how does protocol feasibility help with this? A lot of what we're talking about is study activation processes, even things that are ongoing study items such as consenting. So how do we take care of these way up front before we've really even done much with a study? Well, you should be considering everything in the staff equipment and training. So equipment also meaning facilities. Really discussing at the front, does your investigator know how to run this study properly? Do they have the right training? Have they done research before? Have they done similar studies? If you have an investigator who has run a lot of really large phase 3 studies, and all of a sudden they're going to do an investigator-initiated phase 1, do they have the knowledge to do that? They might, they may not. And making sure that you know where those gaps are is really important so that you have the right co-investigators, so that you have the right mentorship, so that maybe you have a different leadership and this person takes a role as, kind of a co-investigator to watch one, learn one, do one and teach one, making sure that that person has the infrastructure to be successful. Do you have the staff bandwidth to conduct the study accurately? Sure, you may say we have plenty of study coordinators that can do this, but are they already working on other studies? Now, it's not that every coordinator gets one study, obviously, but taking a look at their current workload and saying, you know what, if this study is looking at enrolling X number of people in the next 3 months, does this coordinator have the time to actually go through and help with pre-screening and consenting and whatever procedures they're supposed to be doing? If your regulatory staff is already working on a number of studies, and they are just coming in with amendment after amendment after amendment, and they're constantly working on talking to the IRB and making sure that the study team has the most recent consent forms, making sure that those updates are communicated across the board. Do they have time to activate another study? Activation is very regulatorily intense. Do your staff actually know how to do the procedures on the study? Can they properly recruit? Do they know how to find those participants, identify them within the investigators? Do they know how to actually conduct and do the procedures on the study? Have they actually been trained on those protocol procedures? Do they have the proper licensures? And that's not just your staff, but that can be your investigators. Do you have the necessary equipment? I mentioned imaging earlier. Do you have the right laboratory set up? Do you have the right clinical research space set up? If you're supposed to be doing exercise testing, do you have access to that type of information? Do you have access to those machines? Having talked to your sponsors, making sure that they're helping you get access to those equipment as you need them, the right setups, making sure that all that's up front. Again, what it does is it presents you with information so that you can have conversations to set your study up for success or decide that maybe this isn't the study for you. I would like to think more of the former than the latter. Being someone who is very pro research from all aspects, we want to get good science out there. But there are just some studies that may not be right for your organization at this time. And maybe it's a never, and maybe it's a not now. And knowing what that is, it's a yes, we can do it. Yes, we can do it, but we need some more things. No, we can't do it right now, but can we talk to you in a month, 2 months, 3 months when these other studies close? Or, you know what, this study's not a good fit for us. Come talk to us for the next one. That shows maturity, that you understand what research your organization can handle, and really shows that you are willing to do really good research. And if you take on a study, you're going to execute it to what you need to do. All right, so we've gone through financial viability. We've gone through operational ability. One thing that everybody knows you have to be able to do if you're going to agree to doing a study is accrue participants. There's no reason to open a study if you can't accrue. And it's been reported in numerous places that between 20 and 50% of studies at a site level accrue no participants. That's a waste of resources. It's just strictly from a business sense bad. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of staff. It's frustrating. Investigators don't like it. Research staff don't like it. Nobody wants to accrue nobody. Your patients aren't being served. Your catchment area, if you are working with a hospital system, your population in the community around you do not get served by having research studies that don't accrue people. And so it's really important that early on you determine whether or not you can meet the requested accrual goal in the time that you're supposed to accrue. And this is important for every single study. A lot of people will take a look at this for their industry studies, saying, hey, you know what, we think we can accrue 10 people in the next 3 months. That sounds great. We can do that. But also, you have to do these analyses for your investigator-initiated studies. The power analysis, your statistician says, hey, if you want to actually measure this outcome, you need to enroll 100 people. Cool. Investigator wants to open it. But can you enroll 100 people? How do you enroll 100 people? Can you do it at your site? Do you need to get satellite sites? Do you need to get collaborators? Like, how does this actually work? And so making sure that you can actually accrue those people, really ensure that the study objectives can be met. Critical for all studies. Again, if you don't accrue the met goal for an industry sponsored study, yeah, the sponsor can go and get another site. They can accrue that way. What does that do? It wastes time, it wastes money. Hopefully they can still meet the scientific objectives because they can still open it. It still makes a huge delay that's completely unnecessary. But really the stakes are really high for federally funded and investigator-initiated studies too. If you are the only site that's going to be accruing these 100 people to your IIT, if you can't accrue and you can't answer the scientific question, then your study is now ethically questionable because you have put people at risk without being able to answer the questions that the study is asking, which means there's no benefit to medicine and science. And that risk-benefit ratio is unbalanced. And that's something to really take into consideration. And that's why it's important why accrual estimation should take place on every study that you are considering, whether you're the sole site, whether it's a small multi-site with some collaborators or a huge industry study. That's why it's important, is because regardless, at the very best, if you don't accrue, you're wasting time, money, and resources, which is not awesome. And at the worst, you are conducting unethical research, which nobody wants to do. So we talked to our sites. How are they actually evaluating accrual during study activation? And it's really good to see that almost everyone, 92%, were proactively identifying whether or not they have an adequate participant pool. If this study is enrolling this specific patient population, they're going and seeing, do we actually have that patient population from which we can enroll subjects from? Great. Almost 9 out of 10 are assessing potentially competing studies. I would love to see that higher. Why? Well, if you have a participant pool of this population, if you have a study that's already accruing for that same population, your pool has shrunk. You have to share the pool. You have to share all the pool toys. You have to make sure that everybody gets a share. And there's going to be people in that pool that don't want to join a clinical study. So understanding what those screen fail rates are, as well as people who don't want to participate. So again, you have X number of patients in our system that have this diagnosis that fit the criteria for the study. Competing studies is going to shrink that pool. People who don't want to participate are going to shrink that pool. People that are actually able to participate right now is going to be smaller. So all of a sudden, these competing studies really make your pool smaller very quickly. It might be one. If you have 2 or 3 or 4, again, it's not that you can't do the study, or it's not that you don't want to do the study, but maybe it's not right now. See when that study is looking to close. You know what? We have it open. We would love to reconsider the study in a month because we think we'll finish enrollment on that one. That then again opens up our pool and makes us more successful to match this study. A number that was really concerning to me is that while people are taking a look at the right now, what do we have available right now? Only 2/3 were looking at what have we done in the past. Past performance is a great indicator of how you're going to perform in the future. Unless you really make some massive changes to your procedures, you tend to repeat the same patterns. And so only 68% of our organizations in this survey stated that they actually look at how they accrued on past studies. If you told this sponsor, yeah, we can accrue 10, how did you actually accrue? Did you accrue 10? Did you accrue 2? Did you accrue none? Very common that investigators overestimate their accrual goals. They're optimistic. They want to cure disease. They want to progress science. They're really enthusiastic about their work, and we're very grateful that they are. But what is the actual outcome of that? Making sure you take a look at similar studies. How did we do on the last breast cancer phase 3 study in an outpatient setting? Did we meet our goals? What was our screen fail rate? Taking a look at those studies is going to help you be able to evaluate how you're going to do on this next study. So what are some protocol feasibility processes that can help? And I've already mentioned a couple of these. Taking a look at your PI's completion record. How well have they done on past studies? What are the screen fail rates for that population, and how did similar studies perform? And then making sure that you don't just look on the past, because you can change things for the future. Knowing how you did before, again, opens conversations for how can you do better. If you want to accrue 10 and you consistently accrue 3 or 4, what are some recruitment strategies to try and up that to 10? Do we need to add another investigator? Do we need to add another satellite site? Do we need to reach out and say, hey, you know what, we have another pocket of patients that are seen on the other side of town for this indication. Maybe we need to get them involved in this research study as well, either as an actual clinic doing the research or referring them over to us. Get those strategies in place early on, build those relationships so that you can say, yep, we feel confident that we can accrue to this study. Where do you actually get those referrals? How do you actually advertise? How do you get out into the community? Not everybody's going to be coming into a clinic to hear about research. How do you get out to the people that are trying to find information? Patients are getting savvier. Their caregivers, their advocacy groups are getting really savvy on finding research. Help them easily find your study. How do you get out to them in a way that's going to be meaningful and understandable to them so that then they come to you and say, I want to be involved. And then also making sure not just that you can accrue the people, but can you accrue them in the timeline that's being asked for? Sure, I can accrue 10 people, give me 5 years. No, we need to do it in the next 6 months or 12 months. Understanding and time boxing that is really important to success as well. All right, so I've been talking about past performance data, and it's really important to know, but it's not just on your accrual statuses, but it's also taking a look at how long does it take you to activate a study. Again, we're looking at the pool of right now. What are the competing studies now? How's our participant pool looking now? How have we performed in the past with accrual, but also how long has it taken us to activate a study? And what was really encouraging is basically everybody in our survey was able to say, this is the activation timeline to get a study up and going at our organization. That's wonderful. You know how long that takes. That's really important to know because, again, you're going to be talking to your sponsors about it. You're going to be planning out your workload on it. You're hopefully allocating staff time, knowing that it's going to be X number of days or months until this is going to activate. However, even while almost everybody was able to tell us what their activation times were, 63% did not. They did not. So that means only about a third did consider those activation timelines as part of protocol feasibility. Why is this important? Well, especially when you're thinking about really highly competitive studies, phase 1s that are enrolling 3-by-3 blocks. They're only enrolling, 20 participants nationwide. If you're not opening that study quick, there's no chance that you're going to have any opportunity to accrue. highly innovative drugs. People want to, you have something that's in a late phase. They may be enrolling a lot of people nationwide, but a lot of people want to get on that study. You need to be up there and activating. You need to know how long it's going to take to open that study so that you can get on the board and say, yep, we're going to be accruing to that study. If you know it's going to take you a long time, you can communicate that to the sponsor, to your organization, your investigators. You can also take a look at where your bottlenecks are and say, you know what, we don't want to take this amount of time to activate. We want to be quicker. These are where our bottlenecks were. These are where the gaps were. I need to have proactive conversations with my contract office, with my IRB, with my investigator, with my research team to say, we can't have these bottlenecks for this study or at all. How do we improve the process? How do we make sure that something doesn't sit on somebody's desk for 2 weeks before it gets signed? How do we make sure that we can do as many things concurrently instead of sequentially? If we can take these processes that are normally back to back and stack them on top of each other, that can shorten our times. Understanding your past performance data is going to help you for this study as well as your entire portfolio. And it was really important to note that we asked about sequential versus concurrent processes, and those organizations that allowed concurrent IRB review with financial negotiations were more likely to report overall activation timelines that were lower. And so we had asked, do you have to have IRB done before you're allowed to do your budget? Can you do them concurrently, but one approval has to happen after the other, or can you completely overlap them? And it was a tiered. The longest ones were those that said, nope, they're completely sequential. You can't start financial till after IRB. The ones that allowed overlap were a little bit less. The ones that said, just do it all and get it done, and we'll check it all at the end, they had the fastest activation times. So take a look on where you can actually improve those processes, not just in the amount of time it takes, but in how they're actually performed. I've already talked about assessing the likelihood to accrue, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you're really making sure that you're allowing communication with the sponsor for accurate expectation setting. It's disappointing when you don't accrue the goal. It's disappointing to the organization, the investigator, the research team, the sponsor. They're counting on you. Everybody's counting on that to be done. And so make sure that you have realistic goals. And if you don't think you're going to accrue the number that they were asking you to, go back and say, you know what? We really think we can accrue 3 or 4 or 5. Can we start there, and then with the potential to extend based on that? Make realistic expectations for you and your program so that you succeed at those expectations. So we talked about a couple of different aspects that they're all related, but they seem disparate in some ways. We have financial aspects, we have operational aspects, we have staffing and equipment within that operation. We have accrual, we have past study timelines. So what happens when you put them all together in an analysis up front, what you're getting is you're getting a picture of where your blockers and challenges are. Great. We have the study coming in. We're really excited about it. Here are the things standing in the way of success. How do we get rid of those? How do we bulldoze those down so that we basically have a nice, clear path to being successful? It allows you then to have proactive conversations with stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are the sponsor, the funder, whether it's the investigator, whether it's the compliance offices, your financial people. Making sure that all of those are together is really important. And you can have those conversations up front so that people aren't blindsided or ask for things at the last minute, which can cause angst and anxiety. You can reserve that staff effort for study conduct. You can say, hey, we know what your workload is. We're going to add this study. We feel like it's still manageable. You can have those conversations. How does this feel to you? When is accrual winding down for a study and ramping up for a study, another study, being able to manage those portfolios? Again, preserving that important workforce that you have. You've invested a lot in those staff. They're trained. They know your systems. Let's retain them. Let's utilize them to their best abilities. And then again, you can modify your recruitment strategies to ensure those accrual goals are met. And when the accrual goals are met and the data is collected, that means that you're fulfilling your role as a site, that you're conducting good, solid science, you're helping the people in your community that are at need. And so one of the things we wanted to talk to sites about was, okay, these are all the different aspects. We asked about each of them. As you can see, we had varying success factors on how many, what percentage of sites were actually invoking them within their study activation process. So how often are these actually used? And so when we looked at each of these different elements, we found varying success. And as I mentioned, 92% of people were identifying an adequate participant pool. That's great. We still have room to go. There's still, 8% out there that need to be doing that. But really, it goes down pretty quickly when you're getting into, the 80s, the low 80s with adequate facilities. I mean, that's 16% of sites, that don't know if they have the adequate facilities to complete the procedures, or they just assume that they do, or they'll figure it out later. And again, getting back into looking at past performance, how that might implicate your future performance, those numbers go down sharply. And so taking a look at all of these for a complete protocol feasibility analysis is going to set your site up for success. And only 30% of our respondents said, yes, we look at all 7 of these elements, less than 1 in 3. So if you want to elevate your site, make it successful, really set yourself up as a research site that can meet its requirements and really enforce good, solid science and medicine in your organization, get a protocol feasibility process in place that's looking at these things up front so that you can set the entire study up for success, not just for activation, but through study conduct. So as I've mentioned, this is part of a bigger survey that Advarra conducted in late 2020. We have a free download of our reports that is available off of our website. I encourage you to go and take a look at it. There's a lot more information in it. And then I am also happy to take questions now, but I'm also happy to talk with you at a later time. So here's my email up here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Michael. And I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Fantastic, Wendy. Wonderful presentation, as always. Yes, some questions have come in. Let's get right to them. Some of these came in a little earlier, so that you may have covered this subsequently, but I'll toss the question out anyway. If a sponsor rolls out with a protocol amendment which markedly increases workload, competes with other trials, do you recommend going through protocol feasibility again before accepting the amendment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and protocol amendments can be really tricky based on that. Yes, I do recommend that. Maybe not the entire process, but definitely needs to be considered on what it's going to take to actually implement that amendment. And that includes financial analysis. There are a lot of people we talk to that do not consider reworking their budget based on an amendment. But if you are being asked to do significantly more because of a protocol amendment, that's really important. It's important to know where those gaps are going to be potentially and how you can actually effectively implement that amendment. And so I do recommend keeping this as an ongoing process, especially for those major amendments.
Okay, here's another question. Which function do you suggest to conduct the protocol feasibility?
Which function? Okay, I think I understand the question. If not, please jump back in and let us know.
Sorry, it came in about 30 minutes ago, so it was pretty early on.
Yeah, so pretty early on, but there's a couple ways that you can actually do protocol feasibility. We actually asked about these elements throughout the study activation process, and a lot of people, once it goes to the budget, they may do financial feasibility. What we actually recommend is actually coming up with a review process up front, and that can be it could be a formal committee, it could be a couple of people. If you have a centralized clinical trials office, it might be the director and the administrative director within that, taking a look at these elements that are pulling in people as necessary. The important thing is to get people who understand each of these elements early on, looking at this and ensuring that those things are being met and those resources can be dedicated. So it's usually going to be some sort of administrative staff who are involved in the research process, collecting some of these big things, and then making a recommendation forward. Again, if it's a centralized CTO who is actually running the staff, they can say, yes, we can dedicate the resources. Yes, we made sure about this. If you're in something like an NCI designated cancer center, the CTO may say, we can do that, but we're going to let the scientific review committee determine whether or not, all of these other things are feasible. But really the important thing is key players early on and review. I try and not say, yes, you should have as many committees as possible. I do have to say, in my dissertation work, we took a look at protocol feasibility, and we had one organization, we only looked at one, it was a case study. They implemented a protocol feasibility committee. They actually saw their study activation timelines go down because, again, they got rid of studies that they weren't going to focus on, and the other ones they could streamline. So early on, could be a committee, could be a couple of review people. The key is have a process.
Another question has come in. What would you recommend for resourcing based on protocol demands? For instance, SC to PI ratio or sub I to SC ratio?
Ratios are hard, you know, and I'm not going to answer your question. I'm basically going to say you have to take a look at your therapeutic area, how severe is the conditions that you're working with. Oncology is going to look different than cardiology, which is going to look different than pediatrics and respiratory. So I think one of the important things to think about is the density of the patient contact that you're seeing. You need to take a look at how spaced apart your visits are. Again, if you're doing phase ones that have back-to-back PKs with, very intensive resourcing for a short period of time, you may need to have a higher study coordinator to patient and then study coordinator to investigator ratio, or I should say lower. But if you have something that's more in a long-term follow-up survival type study, that coordinator can take on a lot more studies. So really, I think you need to take a look at, again, therapeutic area. You need to take a look at the procedures and how dense they are. And you also need to take a look at the intensity of the interventions and making sure that those are licensed and resourced appropriately.
Okay. Another question sort of slash comment. You say protocol feasibility really early on, but what do you do when the PI commits before you have this process done? Or when you have a site selection visit and they select you and start sending the reg packets and budget, contract, et cetera?
Yep, actually, I actually recommend protocol feasibility right when you get that packet. At my previous institution, we would have this a lot. The PI would say, yep, we're going to do the study. And all of a sudden, my CTO would get the packet and they're like, and we're like, nope, we're going to stop right here. The investigator has said yes, but we have not, our investigators did not oversee our coordinators, nor did they have the authority to be able to say that they would dedicate this, the core facilities. And so we would basically say the investigator has said yes. However, that is not the final yes. And a lot of times we would end up having conversations with the investigator and saying, okay, we know you really want to do the study. Here's the gap. They're only going to give X amount of dollars per participant. Our initial finances are saying, we need this. How are you going to help us? And we would have investigators get on the phone with sponsors and help us finish out gaps if our budget negotiators couldn't get it. We had investigators say, you know what, you need another site. Let me call my buddy over here at this satellite site. Let's get him recruited. Get your investigator involved. I mean, that's their role. That's their job. And if they want to succeed, it's that conversation with them to say, we want you to succeed. These are the things that's going to take for you to be operationally feasible.
Okay. Another one's come in. How can we bypass a situation where the PI is adamant to participate in a specific study, but has no control over research fees that are imposed by the site that a sponsor may feel are too high?
Yeah, that's a budget negotiation nightmare. I have to say, budget negotiation, I did it for a very short time as a stopgap, and I always love the people who have dedicated their careers to financial clinical research success. So thank you, first of all. So my recommendations is really make sure that you have a conversation with the sponsor. One of the things, and if you take a look at that report, you'll find is we actually found that sites that actually itemized, or at least did a hybrid of some itemized and some bundled fees, were able to get higher startup than just a single bundled fee of startup fees. So sponsors are willing to pay for things when they're justified. And so a lot of conversation then comes to, how do we have that conversation with the sponsor to say, you know what, this is the price of doing business with us. I will tell you, every site I talk to, every sponsor's told them they're the most expensive site. Not everybody can be the most expensive site. So guess what? You have the power to go back and say, this is the cost of conducting business. We want to do this with you. We want to partner with you. But the other thing to look at, if you're a state-run institution, there's likely a state law that says that you are not allowed to subsidize private companies, which means you can't subsidize those sponsors. They need to take on those costs. We've had a lot of sites take that on. Say, we are a high quality research institute. We can conduct this. We can do this. We have a good track record, but that means that we need to be able to dedicate our resources. And if you can pay to make sure that these are dedicated, they are dedicated to your study. They will conduct the study. So it's having that conversation to basically say, you're worth it. You are worth that cost. That is what it costs to do business. And you need us. We want you. We don't need you, actually. We can go to a different site or study. But this is what it's going to take.
Okay. Here's another pretty specific question. How can we get our point? So let me start again. How can we get our point across about the importance of site operational ability in an organization where the finance and contracts department are separate from the site and do not take the site's feasibility into consideration when completing contracts. Since then, dysfunctional.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And especially when you're talking about a multifaceted organization that may not just be doing research or clinical research, they may be doing lots of different research. They also may have something like students and tuition, or they're running an actual patient facility. You know, there's a lot of different things that come into play there. And you know, I think that's a relationship building that needs to occur. And I don't have a quick fix for you on that. But really, again, having conversations to say, you know what, in order for us to run research appropriately, we want to make sure that we're not running the organization into the ground financially. We don't want to be talking to you about negative balances on our accounts. We want to make sure that we have all this up front. And so it's really important that before a contract gets signed, like way before a contract gets signed, even before the budget is agreed upon, you know, we need to know that all these operational things are covered. Because if you guys aren't recouping costs, then those financial people aren't achieving their job goals either, even if clinical research isn't their forte or their primary duty. And so really bringing it up front, and again, wrapping it around to what matters to them, making sure, okay, your goal is to make sure that the accounts are stable, that we're meeting our obligations financially, making sure that we can actually do the research that we're committing to, because we don't want to take money from a sponsor and then not be able to deliver, because that's not good relationship building either in any way, shape, or form. And just being able to say, how can we work on a process to make sure that this is going to be able to happen? And even if that means a non-financial person is taking a look and doing the financial feasibility, and even if you can get in these are the must-haves, like these are things that we know are really important, or these are things that are difficult for us, or we know that our staff time, that's a big one. Most financial parts of the organization don't know how much staff time costs. So saying, you know what, if you can handle this portion that you normally do, and then have us add in staff time so that we can make sure we have a full financial picture, that could really help, rather than saying you need to include this. Say, can we help provide this for you? So a couple of little hints to hopefully solve that gap.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, and if it's okay, we're not going to get to everything today. So maybe if you don't mind, Wendy, if folks can maybe reach out to you or afterward and follow
Absolutely.
up. And you will get actually a list of all the questions that we don't get to today, so you can also address them later with people directly. But let's do one more.
Great.
Would you advise that sites conduct a risk assessment while considering protocol feasibility? Is this something that needs to be documented and retained? Perhaps create a protocol implementation plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, risk assessments I think are really important, and a lot of especially for investigator-initiated trials, if you're taking on the risk of that protocol, that needs to be considered to make sure that you're managing all different aspects of risk. A lot of organizations have risk management departments. You should definitely be talking to them to make sure that they're involved if they're supposed to be. Maybe they think they already know all of the risks going on your campus, whether that be a hospital campus, a private practice, or an academic organization. If you're not in touch with your risk management department, get in touch with them. They may say, you know what, you're fine as long as you're not doing X, Y, and Z. There's other risk involved to research, obviously. And so I would definitely take a look at risk as part of your operational feasibility or logistics, making sure that all of that's covered. Again, there are a lot of different departments within organizations that are handling things like radiation, radiology, imaging, nuclear medicine. A lot of those have their own risk management built around them. And if you're utilizing those departments, just ask them. They may already, if you go to them and say, hey, you know what, we have these procedures that need to be done, they may be incorporating their risk management already into that protocol as being a subcontractor essentially for you, but make sure of it. Don't just assume. So definitely having those things in place and then knowing who you need to go to. And that's why it's important, again, to do operational feasibility early on, because again, they already know that they have to do these things for their pharmacy licensure, for their CLIA licensure, for their imaging, and all of those different other things. They may have those things built in for you. But if you can identify specific research, identified risks, like potentially through if you have dedicated clinical research space, there could be risks surrounding that. Talk to your risk management officer, see if they have suggestions on what might be most applicable for your organization, and include that in your operational feasibility.
Wendy, Tate, I want to thank you for an outstanding presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, we're now going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to have a digital coffee break. So don't go anywhere. Don't touch that dial, as they say. Stick around with us for a little bit. And we're our fourth session at 1:30 Eastern time is a Texpo session with Bree Burks from Viva. Exit the feature battle, how to think long-term and prepare your site for the future of technology in clinical research. So stick around for the digital coffee break and some surprises perhaps coming your way. And then we'll have our next and fourth session of 5 today at 1:30 Eastern. So in about 15, 16 minutes. So we'll see you in a little bit, but stick around.
Welcome to our digital coffee break. My name is Rich Hurley, and I'm a magician, so get ready for some caffeinated conjuring, virtually amazing magic with my friends here at ACRP in a live magical presentation. Are you ready? Let's go. Give a little enthusiasm here, wave, give a thumbs up. Yes, you're all movie stars now. Yes. Well, thank you. That was nice. Thank you. I want to show you something. Real Time came up with this great virtual menu. Hey, they figure, oh, look, there's alcohol. You know, it's after 5 o'clock here, 5 a.m. Doesn't matter. Hey, look, this is a coffee break stuff, but look at some of the great things they have on this menu. Check this out. You know what? This is amazing here. Let me show you some of my favorite things on this menu because I want to share them with you. This is the beef Wellington, very flaky crust. It's as flaky as I am, and that's flaky. Oh, look at this filet mignon. Isn't that awesome? Oh, wait a minute. There's also some side dishes here if you're interested in some chili or something like that. But for me, I never met a hamburger I didn't like. This is called the Magical Owl Burger. PETA people, don't get concerned. It's not a real owl. It's just an owl burger. We call it that for magic reasons. But here's how a magician takes something off the menu. We do not call Grubhub. We do not call DoorDash. We just take it off the menu. Yes. Oh, delicious hamburger. Oh, wait a minute. That comes with an iced tea as well. A delicious, refreshing iced tea, which I'm almost ready to drop. Oh, check that out. It's real. Refreshing. Yes. Now, when a magician takes something off the menu, we really do take it off the menu. Look, the owl burger and the iced tea are gone.
Excellent.
And that's a virtual menu. We're going to make the virtual real here today. What do you guys think?
Yay.
Awesome. All right. Okay. Well, what would a magic show be without a card trick? And what would a card trick be without someone to pick a card? So I'm looking out here in my gallery here. I'm going to pick someone here to help me out. And Elise, can you go ahead and unmute there for me? Elise, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, can you hear me?
All right, and everybody's in speaker view. You should see Elise up in the corner. Give me a heads up if you can see her in there. Give me a wave. Awesome. And where are you, Elise? I think you said earlier.
I'm in San Antonio, Texas.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm here in Southern California. This is great. All right, so we're going to do a little card trick. First of all, I want to show you something. There's a sign over here. It says Mission Possible. You've heard of the Mission Impossible franchise. I have the Mission Possible franchise. So just like ACRP, I can make anything possible. And this is my miniature briefcase, which contains the most powerful playing card in all of Magic. That is the Joker, my friends, the Joker. And here, I'll show it to you. There is the Joker. I'm going to take the Joker out of the box here, and I'm going to put it in this jar because this is a hermetically sealed jar. The Joker goes in the jar like this. You know what? You don't have to take my word for it. I'll show it to you. I'm not one of those namby-pamby, skeleton-licking, card-cheating, false-shuffling, lying magicians. No, there really is a Joker here. Check it out, the Joker. Now watch carefully, Elise. Don't take your eyes off this Joker. Do not take your eye off the Joker. It's going right here in the jar. It's not going out of camera view at any time. The lid goes on top. It is now hermetically sealed. It is going to stay in camera view the entire time. Now, Elise, in a loud, clear voice, yes or no, is there any doubt in your mind? Is there a Joker in this jar?
No doubt. No, there's a Joker.
No doubt. Do you see the second Joker?
No, I don't.
That's me. Watch, it's not going to go out of view of the camera. It's going to stay in view of the camera at all times, right next to our Mission Possible sign. Now, magicians always need a deck of cards. So where do magicians get their cards? At the magic shop? No, we make our own. And this is my do-it-yourself playing card kit. Yes. Now, the cool thing about a do-it-yourself playing card kit is they don't even give you the box to put the cards in. They give you these cardboard forms. So what I have to do is make the magic happen, and it looks like this. Now it's starting to look a little more like a real box of cards, isn't it? Now I'm going to connect flap A to flap C to flap R, ACR, and flap R to flap P, ACRP. Well, that's easy to remember. I say the magic words mele kalikimaka, and look, we now have a regulation deck of playing cards.
Impressive.
Oh! Yay!
Nice.
That's making the virtual reel, right? Now, Elise, I'm going to ask you to, I have a regulation deck of playing cards here, and I'm going to ask you just to say stop anytime. Wherever you say stop, that is the card we will use. Do it sometime today, though. We're not picking out shoes.
All right. Stop.
Okay, which one? Name it.
Name it.
Yeah, which card do you want to use?
6 of clubs.
The 6 of clubs. I'm going to put that on front of the deck. Now we're going to put some very secret markings on here. So I'm going to ask you for some secret information. May I have the last 4 digits of your social security number, please? Most people make it up, but you can give me the real one.
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, how original. 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't get that number a lot. The IRS must have some duplication error there. I love it when people, though, give me their real social number, because then I'm living high on the hog for a month until they open up their bill. And it's an ELISE, right?
Yes, correct.
So now this is a very unique card. It has your name on it. It has your fake social security number on it. Now, I'm going to put this card somewhere in the center of the deck, and I'm going to do this face up so you know it's really going in the center. I'm going to mix the cards face up so you know the cards are really being faced up, because I am not one of those namby-pamby, skill-licking, card-cheating, false-shuffling ne'er-do-wells. No, these cards are as mixed up as I am, and I'm as mixed up as confetti in a wind tunnel. I mean, I'm a mixed-up guy. All right, Elise, we are now going to perform for you and everyone at ACRP the world's fastest card trick. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Drum roll, please. Drum roll, fastest card trick. Would you like to see the trick again? Oh, no, I know it's a bad joke. No, the trick is over. Have you been watching this card over here? The Mission Impossible card? It's actually Mission Possible card, and it's never going out of frame. It's still there. Okay? I'm going to open it up and I'm going to show it to you again because it's the Joker. And Jokers are wild. Now, if you were here, I would spill this into your hand. You can see there's absolutely nothing else in the jar. And it's still the Joker. But Jokers are wild. And there it is, your card, signed, sealed, and delivered.
Wow.
Very good. Very nice. Wow. Very
Mission Possible. But wait a minute. Some people ask, Elise, some people say, where's the Joker? Right here, inside the briefcase, is the Joker. Came right back for me to use again in my next show.
Wow. That's impressive.
That's awesome.
Very good. Very good.
Elise, you did, what a great person to help out. You did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. Now be very careful going back to your seat. This is a virtual stage. Be very careful going back to your seat.
Thank
Okay?
you.
Thank you. Oh! Oh my. Boy, this virtual stuff, it is tricky. It is dangerous. At ACRP, we have to be flexible and deal with the times and all the challenges that the times give us. So as a magician, I have to break the screen barrier. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a barrier between us. It's an LED screen, an LCD screen, a CRT screen, whatever the technology. There's a screen between us, and my goal is to break that screen barrier. So what I'm going to do is pick someone here from the gallery to help me out. And let's see here. All right, wave your hands if you want to be a helper. I'm looking at you guys in the gallery here. Oh, okay, and this is Dory. Dory, you want to help out?
Sure, I would.
Okay, I'm going to put you back on here. Now, Dory, we're going to put you on a very special screen. If everybody's on speaker view, they're going to see me looking at you and you looking at me.
Okay.
And do you see this dual screen here on your speaker view?
Yes.
All right, let's get oriented. I want to get a high five from you, okay? So, yeah, now turn towards me, though. There you go. Turn more, no, to your left. There I am.
Yeah.
Now, let's see if we can do a high five. Put your hand next to mine. Oh, it's over here. Over here.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There we go. High five. Yes! We did it. See how we're breaking the screen barrier? Now, what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment, this is mission possible, although it sounds impossible. I'm going to ask you to create something on your side in your imagination and make it magically appear over here on this side of the screen. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. So, Dory, this is how we're going to do it. First, I want you to imagine, let's have a little music. Imagine there's some music playing here. Oh my goodness. Nice. That's very daunting music. It's not the right music, but that's okay. Let's see, what did we do wrong here? Imagine the right music. That's much better. It's a live show, folks. Do you hear the music?
I hear the music, yes.
Wow, I do too. You've got a great imagination. So let's go with this, okay? Imagine you have a deck of playing cards in your hands, okay? Hold it up like this.
Okay.
Got it? All right. And now shuffle the cards. Oh, Dory, take them out of the box first.
Oh.
No, it's a bad joke. I know they're out of the box. Okay, go ahead and take one card out, look at it and memorize it.
Uh-huh.
And now on the count of 3, I want you to throw them back over to me, to my side of the screen. The rest of the cards, not the one you're holding, but the rest of the cards. You ready? Whoa, wow. I should have asked you to put them back in the box first. Sorry about that. All right, so you're holding a card. Now, it wouldn't be the Queen of Hearts, would it?
No.
No, I told you it wouldn't be the Queen of Hearts. And it's not the Ace of Spades.
No.
No, those are the most commonly picked cards. So I have no idea what card you're looking at here. But what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment is I'm going to ask you to throw that single card through the screen. Now you're holding an imaginary card at your fingertips. This is your target.
Okay.
Okay? All right? And on the count of 3, I'm going to ask you to throw that into this empty wine glass. You ready?
Okay.
Okay, here we go. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Whoa, you did it. I heard a wow out there. That's a good sign. Now that's cool, but it looks like it landed with the back facing everyone. So for the first time, can you tell everybody what card this is, just to verify?
The Ace of Hearts?
The Ace of Hearts, no way. I want you to see there is just one single card in here. One single card. And if I turn that card around and it's the Ace of Hearts, would that be a good trick?
That would be
Very
an excellent trick.
You know what? You're amazing because you did it. Look.
I did
And
it.
it's not like there's a whole deck of cards in there. You threw that one single card. Give her a big hand. I think she did a great job. In fact, I think she gets a standing ovation for that one. Hey, yeah, very cool.